The stars looked different through the bridge windows of the UES Defiant. Captain Jake Morrison had been staring at them for hours, waiting for something that might change everything. The ship hummed quietly around him as his crew worked at their stations. They all knew what was coming. "Captain, we have movement on the long-range sensors," said Commander Lisa Brooks from her position at the tactical station. Her voice was calm, but Jake could hear the tension underneath. They had all been waiting for this moment for weeks. Jake turned away from the windows and walked to the center of the bridge. The Defiant was the biggest ship in the human fleet. But he knew it would not be enough. Nothing they had would be enough if the reports were true. "What do you see, Lisa?" 12 ships, sir? Maybe more? They are moving fast and heading straight for us." Lisa's fingers danced across her controls, pulling up more information. "Their energy signatures are unlike anything we have seen before." Jake nodded. It's the first alien contact in human history, and it was not going to be friendly. The colonies on the outer rim had gone silent 3 days ago. The last transmission from New Harmony had been cut off in the middle of a distress call. Now they were coming for Earth. "How long until they reach us?" Jake asked. "At their current speed, about 2 hours, sir." Jake looked around his bridge. These people had served with him for 3 years. They were good people, brave people, deserved to know what they were facing. All hands. "This is the captain," Jake said into the ship's communication system. "We are about to make first contact with an alien species. Based on what happened to our colonies, they are not here to talk. We are going to fight, and we are going to protect Earth. I know we can do this together." The alien ships appeared on the main screen as small dots of light against the darkness of space. As they got closer, the dots grew larger and more detailed. Jake felt his stomach tighten as he saw them clearly for the first time. The alien ships were beautiful and terrible. They were long and curved like swords, with a dark metal that seemed to absorb light. Strange energy patterns danced along their hulls. Each ship was easily twice the size of the Defiant, and there were 15 of them now. "Captain, they are sending a message," said Lieutenant Amy Parker from the communications station. She was young, maybe 25, and this was her first deep space assignment. "Put it on screen, Amy." The main display changed to show the interior of an alien ship. The being that appeared was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and large black eyes. It wore what looked like armor made from the same dark material as their ships. When it spoke, the words came through the translation system in perfect English. "I am War Prime Kethver of the Zephyrian Empire. You will surrender your ships and your world immediately. Your species will serve the Empire or be destroyed. You have one of your time periods called minutes to decide." Jake stepped forward, making sure the alien could see him clearly. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Fleet. We will not surrender. Earth is our home, and we will defend it." The alien tilted its head slightly, as if confused. "Your ships are primitive. Your weapons are weak. We've destroyed your colonies with ease. Why do you choose death?" "Because it is our choice to make," Jake said simply. Kethver stared at him for a long moment. "So be it. You will learn why the galaxy fears the Zephyrian Empire." The transmission ended, and the alien ships began to move into attack formation. Jake turned to his crew. They were all watching him, waiting for orders. "Red alert. All weapons ready. Signal the fleet to attack pattern Delta." The human fleet consisted of 28 ships. They had been built for exploration and trade, then quickly converted for war when the colonies started disappearing. Their weapons were simple kinetic cannons and nuclear missiles. Compared to what they were facing, they might as well have been throwing rocks. The Zephyrian ships opened fire first. Beams of pure energy lanced out across space, each one bright, enough to hurt the eyes. The first human ship to be hit, the Youth Boston, simply vanished. One moment it was there, the next it was a cloud of expanding gas and metal. "Return fire." Jake shouted. The human ships fired everything they had. Missiles streaked toward the alien formation, while the big guns on the Defiant sent tungsten slugs racing through space at a significant fraction of light speed. Jake watched as their weapons struck the alien ships and seemed to do nothing. The energy beams just disappeared against some kind of shield. and the missiles exploded harmlessly against invisible barriers. Another human ship died, then another. The used Chicago managed to get close enough to ram one of the alien vessels, but the Zephyrian ship barely seemed to notice the impact. The Chicago crumpled like paper and drifted away, lifeless. "Captain, our weapons are not working," Lisa reported. "Their shields are absorbing everything we throw at them." Jake watched as more of his ships were destroyed. Good people were dying, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The aliens were too advanced, too powerful. Humanity had reached. For the stars only to find that the stars belonged to someone else. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission from Admiral Stone," Amy said. "He wants to know if we should retreat." Jake thought about it. The smart thing would be to run, save what ships they could and regroup, maybe find a way to fight another day. But if they ran now, Earth would be defenseless. "Tell the Admiral. Are staying. All ships concentrate fire on the lead vessel. If we are going down, we are taking some of them with us." The remaining human ships formed up around the Defiant and charged straight at the Zephyrian formation. It was suicide, but it was better than running. Jake felt a strange calm settle over him as they raced towards certain death. The alien ships seemed surprised by the human attack. They had expected the primitive species to break and run after the first few casualties. Instead, the humans were charging directly at them, firing everything they had. One of the Zephyrian ships took damage. As 3 human vessels concentrated their fire on the same spot, its shields flickered and failed for just a moment, long enough for a nuclear missile to get through. The explosion was beautiful and terrible, lighting up space like a new star. "We got one," someone shouted from across the bridge. But it was too little, too late. The Defiant shuddered as enemy fire found its mark. The lights flickered, and Jake could smell smoke in the air. They were dying, ship by ship, and there was nothing they could do about it. "Captain Hullbreach on Deck 7, reported Chief Engineer Danny Walsh over the intercom. "We are losing life support." Jake looked around his bridge one more time. These people had followed him into hell, and they deserved better than this. But sometimes better was not an option. Sometimes all you could do was face the darkness and refuse to blink. "All hands, this is the captain. It has been an honor serving with you. Remember, we are human. We do not surrender, and we do not quit. Whatever happens next, make them remember that they had to fight for every inch." The Defiant's main gun fired one last time before the ship broke apart. Jake Morrison died at his post, along with most of his crew. But something had changed in that brief, hopeless battle. Zephyrians had expected an easy victory, and instead, they had found an enemy that refused to die quietly. Warprime Kethfer studied the wreckage of the human fleet and felt something he had never experienced before. It might have been doubt. 6 months had passed since the battle above Earth. The human fleet was gone, scattered and broken. The Zephyrian Empire had taken 3 colony worlds and was moving closer to Earth every day. On the planet New Dakota, the war had become something else entirely. Lieutenant Colonel Danny Walsh crouched behind a pile of rubble that used to be a school. The red dirt of New Dakota was mixed with blood and metal from 6 months of constant fighting. His uniform was torn and dirty, and he had not slept properly in weeks. Around him, the remains of the 7th Mechanized Infantry waited for the next attack. "How many do we have left?" Danny asked Sergeant Amy Parker. She was checking her rifle for the 100th time that day. Her hands never stopped moving when they were waiting. 43 soldiers still able to fight," Amy replied. Started with 300. Danny nodded. The numbers told the story of the war. Humans died, and more humans took their place. Zephyrians had better weapons, better armor, and better ships. But they did not understand why humans kept fighting when any reasonable species would have surrendered. The ground shook as Zephyrian heavy weapons opened fire from across the valley. The aliens were getting ready for another assault. Danny could see them moving through his binoculars. They were tall and graceful, their blue skin covered by armor that looked like it was made from liquid metal. Each Zephyrian warrior was worth 10 human soldiers in a straight fight. "Here they come again," said Private First Class Kevin Clark. He was 19 years old and had been on New Dakota for only 2 months. His helmet was too big for his head, and he had to push it up constantly. to see properly, but he never complained and never backed down. The Zephyrians advanced in perfect formation. Their plasma rifles sent bolts of superheated gas across the battlefield. Where the bolts hit, rocks melted and metal turned to liquid. The aliens moved like dancers, each step calculated and precise. They expected the humans to break and run after the first few casualties. Instead, the humans did something that made no sense. They started shooting back. Danny watched through his scope as human bullets bounced off Zephyrian armor. Their weapons were primitive compared to alien technology, but the humans kept firing anyway. When their ammunition ran low, they fixed bayonets to their rifles and prepared to charge. "This is insane," muttered Corporal Lisa Chen. She was the squad's medic, and she had seen too many good people die. "We should fall back to the secondary positions." "No," Danny said firmly. "We hold this line. That is what we do." The Zephyrians. "We're close now. Close enough to see their large black eyes behind their helmet visors." Their war prime, a giant called Thelanok, led from the front. He carried a weapon that could punch through a tank, and his armor had never been scratched by human weapons. That was when Kevin Clark did something that changed everything. The young private stood up from behind his cover and started walking toward the enemy line. Plasma bolts flew around him like deadly rain. One bolt hit him in the chest, burning through his body armor and into his skin. Kevin stumbled, but kept walking. "Get down," Amy shouted. Another plasma bolt hit Kevin in the shoulder, spinning him around. The smell of burned flesh filled the air. Any normal person would have fallen, screaming in pain. Instead, Kevin started laughing. It was not the laugh of someone who had lost his mind. It was the laugh of someone who found the whole situation funny. Kevin kept walking toward the Zephyrian line, his rifle ready, blood running down his uniform. Third plasma bolt hit him in the leg. Kevin went to one knee but did not stop laughing. He raised his rifle and fired a single shot that somehow found a gap in Thelanok's armor. The Zephyrian war prime staggered backward, more surprised than hurt. The entire battlefield went quiet for a moment. Zephyrians and humans alike stared at the young soldier who should have been dead but was still fighting. Kevin used the silence to pull a grenade from his belt. He was still laughing as he threw it into the middle of the alien formation. The explosion knocked down 3 Zephyrian warriors and destroyed their heavy weapon. Kevin finally collapsed, but he was still alive, still conscious, and still laughing softly to himself. The Zephyrians retreated. For the first time since the war began, they pulled back from a position they could have easily taken. Thelanok looked back at the human line with something that might have been fear in his large black eyes. Amy ran to Kevin and started working on his wounds. The plasma bolts had burned deep, but somehow they had missed all his vital organs. Should have been impossible for him to survive, let alone keep fighting. "Why did you do that?" Amy asked as she bandaged his injuries. Kevin looked up at her and smiled. "Did you see their faces? They had no idea what to do with someone who would not quit, so that was worth getting shot for." Danny helped carry Kevin back to their makeshift medical station. Yes. They walked. He could hear the Zephyrians talking to each other in their own language. The translation devices picked up fragments of their conversation. Impossible behavior. No sense of self-preservation. How do we fight an enemy that laughs when dying? Word of Kevin's charge spread through the human forces within hours. Soldiers who had been ready to give up found new strength in the story. If a 19-year-old kid could walk through plasma fire and laugh about it, then maybe they could hold their positions a little longer. The Zephyrians tried to understand what had happened. Their intelligence officers studied the recordings of the battle, trying to find some logical explanation for Kevin's behavior. They could not accept that a primitive species would sacrifice itself for no strategic gain. War Prime Thelanok sent a report to the Zephyrian High Command that would be studied for years after the war ended. In it, he described humans as a species that does not follow the normal rules of warfare. They fight hardest when they are losing and seem to take pleasure in impossible situations. The humans did not understand it either, but they did not need to. Kevin Clark had shown them something important. They did not have to win every battle. They just had to refuse to lose. Over the following weeks, more stories spread through the human forces. A pilot named Carl Stone flew his damaged fighter into a Zephyrian cruiser while singing an old Earth song over the radio. A Marine called Helen Ross held a position for 12 hours after taking a wound that should have killed her. And when the enemy finally overran her position, they found her. Still conscious and still shooting, the Zephyrians began to change their tactics. They started using more firepower than necessary, hoping to kill humans so completely that they could not keep fighting. But this only made the humans more determined. Every excessive use of force was seen as proof that the aliens were afraid. Sergeant Amy Parker noticed the change during a night patrol 2 weeks after Kevin's charge. The Zephyrian sentries were more nervous, more likely to shoot at shadows. They had started wearing extra armor and carrying more weapons than they needed.
They're scared of us,
she told Danny when she reported back. Good, Danny replied. Then be scared. Fear makes people make mistakes. The war on New Dakota continued, but something fundamental had changed. The Zephyrians still had better weapons and superior numbers. They still won most of the battles. But they no longer expected easy victories. Every human position had to be taken by force, and every human soldier fought like Kevin Clark had fought, as if death was just another obstacle to overcome. In the UCH alien command centers, war primes studied maps and casualty reports, with growing confusion. They were winning the war by every measure that mattered, but it did not feel like victory. The humans were supposed to break after suffering heavy losses. Instead, they seemed to get stronger and more dangerous with each defeat. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered dozens of worlds, but they had never faced an enemy like humanity. They were beginning to realize that winning battles was not the same as winning a war. The story of Kevin Clark spread through the human fleet like wildfire. In mess halls and medical bays, soldiers told each other about the kid who walked through plasma fire and laughed. Each telling made the story a little bigger, a little more impossible. By the time it reached Earth, Kevin had become something more than human. Dr. Helen Ross sat in her office aboard the medical ship U.S. Mercy, reading reports that made no sense. She was the chief medical officer for what remained of the human fleet, and the data coming in from the front lines defied everything she knew about human psychology. Impossible recovery rates, she muttered to herself, flipping through digital files. Soldiers returning to combat with injuries that should keep them in bed for months. Pain tolerance levels that are off the charts. Her assistant lieutenant, Roy Fox, knocked on her door and entered without waiting for permission. His left arm was in a sling from a Zephyrian plasma burn, but he had refused to stay in the medical bay. Doctor, we have another report from New Dakota, Roy said, placing a data pad on her desk. You need to see this. Helen picked up the pad and started reading. The report was from a Zephyrian intelligence officer who had been captured during a raid. Under questioning, the alien had revealed something that chilled Helen to the bone. The Zephyrians had a new name for humans. They called them the Laughing Death. They think we are insane, Roy said, noticing her expression. Their psychologists cannot understand why we keep fighting when we know we are going to lose. Helen set the pad down and looked out the window. At the stars, somewhere out there, human soldiers were dying in battles they could not win. But they were not just dying. They were changing the nature of war itself. Maybe we are insane, she said quietly. Maybe that is exactly what we need to be. On the bridge of the command ship U.S. Resolve, Admiral Carl Stone was having similar thoughts. He had taken command of the human fleet after Jake Morrison's death, and every day brought new reports that challenged everything he knew about military strategy. The Zephyrians were winning every major battle, but they were also becoming more cautious. Their attacks took longer to plan and execute. They used more firepower than necessary and retreated when they should have pressed their advantage. Most importantly, they had stopped trying to capture human prisoners. Sir, we have a transmission from War Prime Kethver, said Communications Officer Pete Graham. Wants to discuss terms of surrender. Carl smiled grimly. It was the third surrender offer in 2 weeks. The alien seemed desperate to end the war through negotiation rather than fighting. Put him on screen, Pete. The main display showed the familiar blue face of the Zephyrian commander. Kethvar looked tired, older than he had 6 months ago. His large black eyes held something that Carl had never seen in them before: uncertainty. Admiral Stone Kethver said, "I offer you one final chance to surrender with honor. Your species has fought bravely, but continued resistance is pointless. We will give you good terms." "What kind of terms?" Carl asked, though he had no intention of accepting. "Your people will be relocated to reservation worlds. You will be allowed to govern yourselves under Zephyrian oversight. Your culture will be preserved. This is more than we have offered any other species." Carl pretended to consider the offer. In truth, he was studying the alien's body language. Kethver was afraid. The mighty Zephyrian Empire was offering generous terms to a species they should have been able to crush without effort. "I appreciate the offer," Carl said finally, "but I have a counter-proposal. You'll leave our space and never come back. In return, we will not follow you home and show your people what we have learned about war." Kethver's expression changed. For just a moment, something like fear flickered in his eyes. "You threaten us? You have no ships, no weapons that can harm us? Your worlds are defenseless, are they?" Carl asked. "Your intelligence reports say otherwise. How many of your warriors have asked to be transferred away from human sectors? How many refuse to fight in ground operations? How many wake up screaming from dreams about soldiers who laugh when they die?" The transmission ended abruptly. Carl turned to his staff with satisfaction. The psychological warfare was working better than any weapon they had ever built. On New Dakota, the effects of the changing war were becoming clear. Lieutenant Colonel Danny Walsh watched from his command post as Zephyrian forces approached the ruins of what used to be the city of New Hope. The aliens had overwhelming firepower and numerical superiority, but their movements were hesitant, uncertain. "They are afraid to get close," observed Sergeant Amy Parker. She had been promoted after her actions during Kevin Clark's famous charge. Kevin himself was back on his feet, though his body was covered with scars from plasma burns. "You blame them?" Kevin said, checking his rifle. "Every time they think they have us figured out, we do something that makes no sense." The Zephyrian attack began with their usual massive bombardment. Plasma cannons and particle beams turned the ruins into a furnace of melted rock and twisted metal. Any reasonable enemy would have been killed or driven away by such firepower. Instead, the humans did something that violated every rule of warfare. They advanced into the bombardment. Danny led the charge himself, running through falling debris and superheated air. His soldiers followed him, shouting battle cries and war songs from a dozen different cultures. They should have been terrified. Instead, they were laughing. The Zephyrians stopped firing, confused by the sight of an enemy that charged toward their weapons instead of away from them. In that moment of hesitation, the humans closed the distance and turned the battle into a close-quarters fight, where superior technology mattered less. Private Sue Collins tackled a Zephyrian warrior twice her size and brought him down with a combat knife. Corporal Beth Young used her helmet as a weapon when her rifle jammed, beating an alien unconscious while singing an old drinking song. Sergeant Major Tony Baker fought 3 Zephyrians at once and somehow managed to wound all of them before going down. The battle lasted 3 hours and ended with the Zephyrians retreating. They left behind their wounded, their equipment, and their confidence. For the first time in the war, a human force had driven them from a position through sheer aggression. But the real victory was psychological. Recordings of the battle were transmitted throughout the Zephyrian fleet. Alien commanders watched in horror as humans did things that no rational species should do. They saw soldiers advance into certain death while laughing. They saw wounded humans continue fighting long after they should have collapsed. Most disturbing of all, they saw an enemy that seemed to enjoy the challenge of impossible odds. War Prime Thelanok filed a report that would be studied in Zephyrion military academies for generations. In it, he wrote, "The humans do not fight to win. They fight to fight. Victory and defeat have no meaning to them. They have turned war into a form of play, and we cannot compete with an enemy that treats death as entertainment." The report reached the Zephyrian High Command on their homeworld of Zephyr Prime for the first time in their history. The ruling council considered withdrawing from a conquest. The humans had no chance of winning the war in any conventional sense. But they were changing the rules of engagement in ways that made victory meaningless. Dr. Helen Ross received the translation of Thelanok's report and felt a chill run down her spine. The Zephyrians were beginning to understand what made humans dangerous, but they were also beginning to fear it. "We are not just fighting a war," she told Admiral Stone during their weekly conference. "We are teaching them that there are worse things than losing." "What could be worse than losing?" Stone asked. "Having to fight us again," Helen replied. "And again. And again. Forever, if necessary. We are showing them that humans do not quit, even when quitting is the smart thing to do." The war was entering a new phase. The Zephyrians still had superior technology and numbers, but they no longer believed in their own invincibility. They had learned that there was something in the galaxy more dangerous than superior firepower, an enemy that refused to be defeated. 2 years had passed since the first battle above Earth. The Zephyrian Empire was no longer the confident force that had demanded humanity's surrender. Their warriors moved through space like hunters who had become the hunted, always looking over their shoulders for an enemy that might do anything. Colonel Pete Graham stood on the bridge of the assault ship U.S. Retaliation. Watching New Dakota grow larger on the main screen, the same world where Kevin Clark had walked through plasma fire and laughed was about to be liberated by human forces. But the Zephyrians defending it were not the same aliens who had conquered it 2 years ago. "Enemy positions confirmed," reported Major Sue Collins from the intelligence station. She had been studying Zephyrian communications for months, and what she found disturbed her more than any weapon could. "Sir, they are requesting reinforcements for the 3rd time this week." Pete nodded. The aliens who had once fought with perfect confidence now begged for backup before every engagement. They had learned that fighting humans was not like fighting any other species in the galaxy. "What kind of reinforcements?" Pete asked. "More soldiers, heavier weapons, and psychological support units," Sue replied. "Sir, they have military doctors, specializing in what they call combat stress from fighting humans." Pete almost smiled. The Zephyrian Empire had been forced to create an entire medical field just to treat soldiers who had fought against human forces. Warriors who had faced humans in battle often refused to fight again, claiming that the enemy was not natural. The Liberation Fleet consisted of 30 ships, most of them converted cargo vessels armed with whatever weapons the humans could build or steal. They were still outgunned by the Zephyrian defenders, but numbers no longer told the whole story of the war. Captain Lisa Chen commanded the lead ship, U.S. Defiance. She had served under Jake Morrison during the first battle and had survived when her escape pod was picked up by a medical ship. Now she was back, and she carried with her the memory of every human who had died fighting the aliens. "All ships, this is Captain Chen," she announced over the fleet communication system. "Today we take back New Dakota. Today we show them that humans do not forget, and we do not forgive. Let them remember why they fear us." The Zephyrian Defense Fleet moved to intercept them. But their formation was different from the confident attacks of 2 years ago. They spread out more, used more conservative tactics, and seemed reluctant to engage in close combat. The psychological reports Sue Collins had intercepted explained why. Zephyrian military psychology experts had identified what they called human combat syndrome. Soldiers who fought against human forces developed symptoms that included nightmares, excessive caution, and an inability to understand enemy motivations. The syndrome was spreading through their military like a disease. The space battle above New Dakota lasted 6 hours and was unlike anything seen in the early days of the war. The Zephyrians still had superior technology, but they used it defensively, trying to keep human ships at a distance. When human vessels closed to ramming range, the aliens retreated rather than risk close combat. "They are running," observed Commander Danny Walsh from his position on the Defiance Bridge. He had been promoted after his ground combat service and now served as Lisa's tactical officer. 2 years ago, they would have charged straight at us. "They have learned what we are capable of," Lisa replied. "They know that getting close to humans is dangerous, even when we are losing." The breakthrough came when the converted freighter, U.S. Persistence, commanded by Captain Roy Fox, managed to ram a Zephyrian cruiser. The alien ship was 3 times larger and should have destroyed the human vessel easily. Instead, Zephyrians tried to avoid the collision and lost position in the process. Roy's last transmission was heard. Throughout both fleets, tell my wife I went out laughing. The Persistence exploded against the alien cruiser's hull, taking both ships with it. But Roy's sacrifice opened a gap in the Zephyrian formation that allowed the rest of the human fleet to reach the planet. On the surface of New Dakota, the effects of 2 years of psychological warfare were even more obvious. The Zephyrian ground forces had built their defenses far from human population centers, trying to avoid the close-quarters combat that had proven so costly in previous engagements. War Prime Thelanox still commanded the alien forces on New Dakota, but he was not the same confident warrior who had led the original invasion. His reports to High Command had become increasingly desperate, filled with requests for permission to withdraw from what he called this cursed world. "The humans fight differently now," he wrote in his final report. "They have learned our weaknesses and exploit them without mercy. They use our own psychology against us. We cannot predict their actions because they do not follow rational patterns." The human landing force was led by General Amy Parker, the former sergeant who had witnessed Kevin Clark's legendary charge. She had studied every battle report, every Zephyrian communication, and every psychological profile the aliens had created about human behavior. She knew exactly how to use their fears against them. Remember, she told her troops as they prepared to land, "They expect us to be crazy. Do not disappoint them." The humans did not disappoint. They landed their forces directly into the heaviest Zephyrian defenses, singing battle songs and broadcasting messages that made no military sense. One unit announced over open channels that they were looking forward to the fight because they had been bored. Another group sent a formal invitation to the aliens to come out and play. The Zephyrians responded with massive artillery bombardments, trying to destroy the human landing zones from a safe distance. But the humans had learned to use the bombardments to their advantage, advancing under cover of the explosions and using the chaos to close two hand-to-hand combat range. Private Kevin Clark, now promoted to sergeant, led the assault on Thelanox's command bunker. His plasma scars had healed into a pattern that looked like lightning across his skin, and he had become something of a legend among both human and alien forces. The Zephyrians had put a special bounty on him, but their soldiers were often too afraid to collect it. Tension War Prime Thelanox, Kevin broadcast on all frequencies as his unit surrounded the bunker. "This is Sergeant Kevin Clark of the Human Forces. I believe we have some unfinished business." The response came back in heavily accented English. "You are the one who laughed. You are the one who should have died. Should have, would have, could have," Kevin replied cheerfully. "The important thing is that I did not die, and now I am here to discuss your surrender." The final battle for the command bunker lasted only 20 minutes. The Zephyrians fought with desperation rather than skill, their perfect tactics replaced by panic. When human soldiers breached the outer defenses while singing old drinking songs, several alien warriors simply dropped their weapons and refused to continue fighting. Thelanox himself was captured when he tried to activate a self-destruct device rather than face defeat. Kevin Clark personally disarmed him, and their brief conversation was recorded by military cameras. "Why do you not fear death?" Thelanox asked. "Who says I do not fear it?" Kevin replied, "I just think it is funny that something as big and scary as you is afraid of something as small as me." The liberation of New Dakota marked a turning point in the war that had nothing to do with military victories. The Zephyrian Empire's confidence was broken. Their warriors no longer believed in their own superiority, and their commanders could not predict what humans would do next. Reports filtered back to Zephyr Prime describing human soldiers who seemed to enjoy impossible situations, who fought harder when they were losing, and who treated death as just another challenge to overcome. The ruling council began to seriously consider withdrawal from human space. The humans had not won the war through superior technology or tactics. They had won by being so unpredictable, so illogical, and so persistent that their enemies no longer wanted to fight them. It turned their own weakness into their greatest strength. As General Amy Parker stood in the ruins of Thelanox's command bunker, she thought about how far they had come from that first desperate battle above Earth. They were still the same humans, the same primitive weapons, and the same stubborn, refusal to quit. But now, the galaxy knew what that stubbornness could accomplish. The final battle came to Earth's solar system on a Tuesday morning, when the sun was shining bright on the blue planet that humans called home. War Prime Kethfer brought every ship the Zephyrian Empire could spare, over 200 vessels carrying the finest warriors in the galaxy. This would be their last chance to end the war before it destroyed them completely. Admiral Carl Stone stood on the bridge of the rebuilt used Defiant, watching the alien fleet approach through the asteroid belt. The human fleet numbered only 60 ships, most of them cobbled together from salvaged parts and held together by determination. By every measure that mattered, this should have been humanity's final defeat. "Sir, the enemy fleet is larger than our intelligence estimated," reported Captain Beth Young from the sensor station. She had lost her left eye during the liberation of New Dakota, but refused to accept a medical discharge. "They outnumber us more than 3-1. Carl smiled the same way Jake Morrison might have smiled 3 years ago. Good if it was easy. It would not be any fun. The human fleet moved to meet the Zephyrian advance in a formation that made no sense to trained military minds. Instead of spreading out to minimize damage, the ships clustered together like they were planning a parade. Rather than a battle, instead of trying to use the asteroid field for cover, they flew straight through open space toward the enemy. Most disturbing of all, the human ships were broadcasting music on all frequencies. Old songs from Earth mixed with battle hymns that soldiers had written during the Long War. The sound filled space with defiant joy that chilled Zephyrian hearts. Kethfer studied the approaching human fleet from his command ship and felt the same uncertainty that had plagued him for 3 years. The primitive species that should have been crushed in the first battle had somehow turned war into something else entirely. "War Prime, they are broadcasting a message," reported his communications officer. "It is directed at you personally." "Put it through," Kethfer said. Though he dreaded hearing what the humans would say, Admiral Stone's face appeared on the main screen. He looked older than when the war began, his hair gray and his face marked by years of conflict. But his eyes held the same stubborn light that had burned in every human Kethfer had ever faced. "War Prime Kethfer," Stone said formally.
I want
"To thank you for bringing your entire fleet to our home system. It saves us the trouble of hunting you down ship by ship." "You are outnumbered," Kethfer replied. "Your defeat is certain. Surrender now, and your species will be spared." Stone laughed, and the sound made Kethfer's skin crawl. It was the same laugh that Kevin Clark had made while walking through plasma fire. The same laugh that had haunted Zephyrian nightmares for 3 years. "Spared? We do not want to be spared. We want to fight the biggest, strongest enemy we can find. You have given us exactly what we wanted." The transmission ended, and the human fleet accelerated toward the Zephyrian formation. Stone's last words echoed through both fleets. He took the hit, laughed, and walked right through our lines. A welcome to humanity. The space battle that followed would be studied by military historians for centuries. Not because of the tactics used, but because of what it revealed about the nature of war itself. The Zephyrians fought with desperation, knowing that defeat here would mean the end of their empire's expansion.
Elvis.
The humans fought with joy. As if they had been waiting their entire lives for this moment, Captain Lisa Chen commanded the assault wing that charged straight into the heart of the alien formation. Her ship, the UES Vengeance, had been built from the wreckage of 3 different vessels and held together with spare parts and hope. It should not have been able to fight at all, let alone lead an attack against the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. "All ships, remember what we learned?" Lisa broadcast to her wing. "They expect us to break when things get bad. Instead, we get better." The Zephyrian fleet opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams that could vaporize mountains lanced through space, seeking to destroy the human ships before they could close to ramming distance. But the humans had learned to dance between the deadly lights, their ships twisting and turning in patterns that seemed random, but somehow avoided the worst of the bombardment. Commander Danny Walsh piloted his fighter through a storm of plasma, fire that should have killed him 10 times over. His craft was hit repeatedly, losing shields and armor with each strike. But instead of retreating, he flew deeper into the enemy formation, broadcasting old Earth music and laughing over the radio. "This is Red Leader," he announced to anyone listening. "I am having the time of my life up here. Who wants to dance?" The psychological effect on the Zephyrian pilots was devastating. They had been trained to fight enemies who followed logical patterns, who retreated when damaged and surrendered when outmatched. Humans did neither. They flew damaged ships into combat zones and seemed to fight better as their situation became more hopeless. The breakthrough came when Sergeant Kevin Clark, now commanding a boarding party, managed to get his ship close enough to the Zephyrian flagship to launch assault pods. The aliens tried to shoot down the small craft, but there were too many of them, and they moved in ways that defied prediction. Kevin's pod crashed through the flagship's hull in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. He emerged from the wreckage, with his plasma scars glowing in the artificial light, his rifle ready, and his characteristic smile firmly in place. "Knock, knock," he announced over the ship's communication system. Guess who was coming to dinner? The Zephyrian crew tried to repel the boarding party, but they were fighting in close quarters against humans who had spent 3 years learning how to turn every disadvantage into an advantage. The aliens were stronger and had better weapons, but the humans were unpredictable and seemed to take pleasure in impossible odds. Kevin fought his way to the bridge, leaving a trail of confused and demoralized Zephyrian warriors behind him. When he finally reached Kethfer's command center, he found the War Prime waiting with his personal guard. "You," Kethfer said, recognizing the human who had become the symbol of everything his people feared. "You are the one who laughs." "I am the one who laughs," Kevin agreed cheerfully. "And you are the one who is about to surrender." The final confrontation lasted only minutes. Kethfer's guards fought with the desperation of cornered animals, but they had spent too many years being afraid of humans to fight effectively. When Kevin finally stood face to face with the alien commander, both of them knew the war was over. "Do not understand you," Kethfer said as Kevin took his weapons. "We are superior in every way. We should have one." "You're superior," Kevin admitted. "But you forgot something important. Superior does not mean unbeatable. It just means you have further to fall." The surrender of the Zephyrian flagship triggered a cascade of defeats throughout their fleet. Ship after ship lowered their weapons and requested terms. The mighty empire that had conquered dozens of worlds was broken by a species that refused to follow the rules of warfare. Admiral Stone accepted Kethfer's surrender in the same place where Jake Morrison had died 3 years earlier. "Dot!" The ceremony was brief and without ceremony. The humans had won, but they took no joy in their enemy's defeat. They had proven their point, and that was enough. "What happens now?" Kethfer asked, as he handed over his ceremonial weapon. "Now you go home," Stone replied. "You tell your people what you learned here. You tell them that there are species in this galaxy that cannot be conquered, cannot be intimidated, and cannot be broken. You tell them that humans are one of those species." The Zephyrian fleet limped home to their empire, carrying with them the story of their defeat. The humans let them go, knowing that the psychological damage was already done. Word would spread through the galaxy about the species that turned war into play and found strength in weakness. Years later, and when other alien races asked about the human-Zephyrian war, survivors from both sides would tell the same story. They would talk about a young soldier who walked through plasma fire and laughed, about a species that fought hardest when they were losing, and about the day that humanity proved that sometimes the greatest weapon is simply refusing to quit. Galaxy learned that humans were not the strongest or smartest species among the stars, but they were the only ones who could take a hit, laugh about it, and walk right through enemy lines as if death was just another interesting challenge too. Overcome